Hey everyone, this is Seth Shackner in Los Angeles. I'm your host for Breaking Down the Biz. We are a bi-weekly podcast that breaks down big issues, business issues in the business of music, entertainment, and technology. We publish bi-weekly with a news episode, and at the end of the week, we do something that is much more deeper with special guests who have walked the walk in various parts of the entertainment industry. And today I'm joined by two individuals who I've worked with before and who have really deep knowledge in a variety of areas of media and entertainment. I want to welcome Dan Punt. Dan is the Senior Managing Director of FTI Consulting in Los Angeles, as well as Francesco Ferran, who is, let me get your title right, Senior Consultant as well in the TMT group at FTI Consulting in New York City. So both of you have excellent views on the topic we're going to talk about today, which is AI and music. And also more broadly in film and television. But I'm looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Seth. Great to be here.
Cool. So we're going to talk today about AI music. And, you know, I'm a music industry executive myself, who's worked at places like Sony and Universal over the years. And I find that in general, there's been a ton of publicity around rights and music generative AI and a lot of pretty serious issues, legal issues around some of these new AI platforms and the business models, maybe a little bit too much. And from my experience, AI's got a lot of immediate and practical opportunities, not just for labels, for a lot of parties in the ecosystem. It can help music companies improve their profitability, just with human staffing operations, and there's all sorts of elements in the broader music industry, like catalog licensing and syncs that we're going to talk about. I've even seen some things with A&R and A&R functionality as well, which we're going to go through, and certainly analytics. And I think these are things that aren't often recognized. They're quiet, important uses of AI. And that's what we're here to talk about today, beyond AI music generation. So let's kick this off. I mean, I think it would help a little bit for our audience, Dan and Francesco. We played a general audience, is not too deep in the weeds, if you will. But we've got folks who actually want to understand some of the nitty gritty, but also the high level in AI music, basically. Why don't we first talk about how you're looking at some of these underappreciated corners, and also just what your group does at FTI as well.
Great. Happy to kick it off. So our media and entertainment team is within a TMT industry group within FTI. It's very common for consultancies to be organized this way. We focus exclusively on companies in the media and entertainment space. Music is one of the key sectors, but it exists alongside filmed entertainment, live entertainment, sports, and a variety of other supply chain companies that really support all of the entertainment consumer experiences. And Francesco is a key member of our team here and comes also from a music operations background. And one thing that we do is help companies transform themselves. And sometimes that's changing the operating model, changing the organization structure to allocate their energy and resources in places that are going to be aligned with growth, that are going to be aligned toward margin creation. And sometimes, in the face of technological shock, which is certainly what we're seeing with AI generally, there come a lot of risks and opportunities for companies. There's a lot of actions that companies need to take. Best to be on the front foot around it than on the back foot. So anytime there's a technology disruption or technology shock, it creates a lot of risk, but it also creates a lot of opportunities. And it does put a heavy onus on companies to harness that technology, transform themselves to be competitive in the future. Yeah. And we're seeing this all across media entertainment. Yeah. Music is no exception. And we will work with companies on those transformations.
Let me, it's really interesting some things you just said. Let me do even just to keep to the top level theme before we dive in too deep, because I want people out there to really understand your strengths and where you guys are coming from. I think it's really interesting. You guys just don't do the top level talk, right? I mean, data is a really important part of what you would do. I would imagine if you were to engage, whether it was the Universal Music or a platform, you're going to get pretty deep under the hood in terms of analytics and numbers, and not just spout out on what you think. Is that kind of a fair way to put it?
Yeah. Just to give a little bit of background, it's I think people have maybe in their minds when they're working with management consultants, maybe what the industry used to be 30 or 40 years ago, which would be like, a couple people, you know, sort of sort of breezy people breeze into the room with their Harvard MBAs, and they think the big they're the big idea people, and they come out with big ideas, and have no don't get their hands dirty with any of the execution, and then sort of just breeze out of there. I created a ton of value with my ideas. Um, I think that's the sort of stereotypical image, but
Yeah.
of course, no one wants to pay for that in 2026. There's plenty of smart people. Our clients are brilliant and are more than capable of defining their own strategy. What we often need is arms and legs, hands on keyboard, people who are going to get in and do the grinding work to crunch the numbers, figure out the data, but then also deal with all the human factors too. When a company is transforming itself, it's not just IQ, it's EQ. You have to deal with the people and make the people organization work. Change management around that. There are decisions to be made at the badge level, and with personalities as well as the mechanics of an operating model.
Wow.
All that
Interesting.
work needs to be done. So, and that's really where we come in a lot of times.
Yeah.
And what it means is when we get to some of the topics that we're talking about, it's the insights that we're talking about. It's driven from kind of doing that hard work,
Yeah.
not just sort of opining.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, so just even before we dive in, one little more maybe top level, sense from you, if you will, but AI, I mean, is particularly new, right? For lots of media business lines, right? I mean, I know even with all the announcements in the press, right? Universal just announced something with Spotify, and presumably they'll be doing something similar with Google or Apple, and the products are undefined. And I think, from what I understand, at least to the outside world, and I wonder, like, if you're looking under the hood right now, whether it's for analytics or data or operational processes for this specific segment, I mean, is there a lot meat for you to sort of really make recommendations, or is it kind of a totally new frontier?
I think you nailed it there. In terms of AI, it's very new, and there's two avenues that we see AI being implemented now. There's the generative AI side, which is really making most of the headlines. When it comes to music, most of us have heard of companies like Suno generating new songs, and I think it remains to be seen how that plays a role in the future as the legality around it starts to get ironed out. But where we're really interested is on the back end, and where we can increase efficiency for companies. It's something that FTI has done in the film industry and in other entertainment industries. And we see a lot of opportunity on the record label side to improve the back office functions and essentially generate more revenue in large part on the sync side, as opposed to generating new songs, which is kind of a gray area right now.
Yeah. From my experience working at Sony and Universal, and also just as a consultant in the market, sometimes it's a little shocking when people go in front of major labels and they don't even know all the rights and the data, the metadata, if you will, around their own catalogs. There might be big black holes within the catalogs, or gee, we own that.
Right.
That's got to not just be part of AI, but probably any platform. But is that would presumably be an area that you'd be helping with, I would assume. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I think Francesco really laid it out well. So much of the public discourse is around the generative AI product innovation, which is its own category of conversation, fraught with legal issues, to Francesco's point. And it's also very engaging, I think, for people reading news articles and going to conferences. People are very engaged with it. So there's a lot of attention on that.
Sure.
The perhaps less sexy part, but also, if you're a CFO, quite interesting part is all of the productivity that being in the human talent curation business of a label or a publisher, music publisher, you can operate your business so much more efficiently, so much more effectively. And the way I think about it is, right now, if you look at music labels, WMG, UMG, Sony, they all kind of operate at about a 21 to 23% operating income margin. It's around there. A question that I would have, one question, it's a bit provocative, right? Is essentially these are companies that are offering a digital asset now at this point, or the administration of royalty cash flows that in many cases are recurring in the case of DSPs, though not as much with live music performance, but they're recurring, they're predictable, they're leverageable as proven by the financial markets. And it's the administration and promotion of these particular digital assets and the monetization and royalty accounting, all of this. Why are these companies then not generating margins closer to what we'd see in SaaS companies? SaaS companies generally have bottom line margins in 20% would be the low part, but up to 40, 45%. Why can't these record labels get up to into those higher profit margins? Now, some of it has to do with the way revenue is recognized and the gross margin. Some of it is an accounting detail with how the revenue comes in, which immediately takes money off the top line. But some of it is just the human infrastructure.
Sure.
So if you look at a company like I think Warner Music has over 10,000 employees, or maybe Universal has over 10,000 employees globally. There's a lot of human resources that are used in middle office functions and back office functions, which Francesco was mentioning. A lot of these are what we would consider transactional type of activities that they're doing. They're entering data into spreadsheets, they're answering emails, they're have meetings about the emails, and then they look in databases. They have to look through unstructured data. Something like maybe 20 or 30 documents are created with each album. But when you multiply that over, the entire,
Sure. Territories and platforms and all that. Yeah.
Territories and platform. I mean, we're looking at something like, I was estimating, I kind of wrote this down on UMG's, scale of document. By my estimate, UMG has over 30 million documents that it's, between all of its titles, and then like per title, the documents here, some of these things are very old. They're in PDFs, they're
right.
And you have to retrieve the data. And so you have a human bureaucracy managing these documents and these workflows. This is what AI is designed to do.
Interesting. So, let's step back a second, because you mentioned SaaS, and for our audience, that means software as a service, and Dan's referring to, I don't know what are great examples, but totally different than entertainment companies, right? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah.
But, from my experience, I started it was called MCA, but Universal, and went through, 11 years of the worst year you could pick to work at a major record label. Started at Jive Records, and it was sold to BMG and then to Sony. And, I went, and then it was demerged. So there was something like 4 mergers or something. But to your point, these were big, global, international human companies that had physical business models before digital business models, right? And had tons of catalog acquisitions, territories, licensing. It's a patchwork of stuff. It's not a single unified thing that sits on a server, right? And then you multiply that by languages and territories. So not making excuses, but I don't know, that's got to be a hard thing to look at and maybe compare to a pure software company, right?
It is. And the comparison is intentionally provocative because a music label will never be a software company. Let's be clear. It will never be a SaaS company. But I think the provocative question has value, which is, well, aren't there certain aspects that could be more like a software company? With greater benefit to the equity owners and the pension funds and your retirement fund that owns a piece of it, it's of value to all of us to figure out how to turn these into machines.
Interesting.
That don't have to have a bunch of hamsters running around and rubber bands on the back end, but can really be very efficiently tuned.
Yeah.
And to do that can create a tremendous amount of value.
So you'd say it's a huge, is it a huge problem for sort of legitimizing what I would call, say, an AI music business for them, or you think they've, made enough progress with their people internally to have a credible position in front of a platform like Francesco mentioned, a Suno or a Udio? Or
Just seems like a fundamentally different question. The business model question about how these companies will respond to AI generated music and the kind of experiences that they create with Suno and with Udio and the others, that's a business model question that's rooted in copyright legal theory. There's a lot of negotiation around derivative rights of artists and how you get those royalties back to the artists who created them originally and what that split of economic is. Just a whole
yeah, that's fair.
this issue that's quite important. But even if let's say there was a world where there were no AI generated music tracks, but AI was only its more simple incarnation of machine learning and predictive analytics, still administrating or operating the business of human curation and human promotion, which is what music labels and publishers do. There's a whole host of ways that these companies could be leveraging that technology internally to solve pain points and be much more efficient. And I don't know, we thought of a couple that would be really interesting to dive
Let's hear.
into.
I'm curious. How does AI, how could AI interface and help there?
Francesco, you had talked about sync a little bit. Do you want to go into that?
Sure. Yeah, we think sync is a very interesting area here because we're talking about increasing efficiency on the back end and, how much of the label process is manual. But the idea here is not simply that AI, that we want to replace humans, so to say. It's not about that. It's about using AI to get around issues that humans can't themselves tackle. When it comes to sync licensing, for example, you encounter this issue where a label owns this huge back catalog, right?
Mm.
And they're often searching for the right song to place in said TV show, for example, for said scene. And you're relying on a couple humans who have a knowledge of this catalog and who have a deep knowledge of this catalog. Yeah,
And probably a business relationship too, right? They know each other. Yeah.
absolutely. They know each other. They know. So it becomes very based on individual knowledge and individual relationships. And you inherently exclude such a large portion of the possible catalog just by making it an issue of what does this person know?
Mm.
What songs come to this person's mind? So that's a case where we think AI has huge potential by improving the backend data, the metadata, the taggings that come to this song with AI. You can, in theory, create a platform where someone can go and search, for example, I need a song, a backtrack song for a stormy night by the sea.
Mm.
And, through that, then it can search the catalog and start to match to emotions in a way that only AI can do.
Mm.
What it can really do is extract greater value from your already existing assets that you're now essentially losing and you have sitting dormant. So that's one very fascinating area that we think has a lot of potential.
Yeah, there are a lot of pain points
Yeah.
associated with the sync licensing function. And, for a while, it wasn't a major part of what the label does. It was a part, but a smaller part. It's by some measures, 2% of the wholesale music market.
Mm.
Now, it's growing faster than the music market generally. And by our measure, it's going to grow to, probably hit 3% of the wholesale music market by 2030. So the growth is pretty significant.
But the licensing process can kind of be juiced and amped up is what the main point here is. I'm sort of hearing from this because I think we talked a little bit about this just in prep, but sync's been an interesting experience. Just the way I view it, I work with a bunch of artists here in LA, and they'd all love to have syncs, and the sync income they get comes like kind of erratically.
Right.
It says like something falls out of the sky, someone from Netflix who's representing an individual show and it's about look and feel. I don't know what they're using technically. There were in the past, right? Like you could search for, I've seen that from publishers, and presumably this is an improvement on, just some of the basic search capabilities.
Absolutely. I mean, it exists right now. And this is not to say that what we're talking about hasn't been implemented in some cases, but we think it should be widespread. But the traditional approach to search, I have some friends who did licensing for Paramount, for example. They have a platform and you go in and you have all these filters and you type in keywords, and through that, you find a list of songs and you have to go through them. So that's always existed in the way we've always had Google, for example. But now with natural language search, with semantic natural language search, you have a lot more room to explain your scenario and get a deeper list from the catalog.
Yeah.
That's the future that we see.
I'd say also turnaround time is really important. So when, for example, for a music supervisor working on a film, which typically have a little bit more time, the average response time for them hearing back from a music label on a sync clearance or a sync approval is a month. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And sometimes if the sync is for something like a commercial or an advertisement, the average time a music supervisor has to select a sync track in the commercial production workflow is only 48 hours. Those things are really fast. They have to, that the pipeline is very quick for those things. So what they're forced to do is go with a very select number of titles that are already pre-cleared on the master recording and the publishing side. And, both have to be cleared on the label and the publisher. There's a lot of data inconsistency and chaos in the clearance of these things for sync on the back end for the music labels. Driving better data integration between the two sides, using the AI tools to accelerate, the cross matching of things between the publishing and the recording side, and getting a tighter clearance list for a greater number of titles, then putting it into the thematic sort of agentic search that Francesco was describing. All those things could vastly open the aperture.
Yeah, that seems unquestionably good for everyone, for the whole ecosystem, particularly with the response times. I know because the licensing process can be, some tracks may have 20 writers, and I know for approvals. We're going to take a brief break here. This is a great discussion with Dan Punt and Francesco Ferran of FTI Consulting, and we'll be right back. This is Breaking Down the Biz. Hey everyone, we're back with Breaking Down the Biz, and we're talking with Dan Punt and Francesco Ferran of FTI Consulting. We're talking about AI and music and, shining lights on areas that aren't just the stuff that's in the headlines about generative AI and music creation, about finding value. And so both of you hit on some interesting points around the areas of music rights, which can sometimes be a super mysterious thing, even for rights holders, and royalties. And of course, that means revenue. I thought I'd get your thoughts a little bit. Can AI be used to kind of clear up rights messes or rights inconsistencies? And can labels even find more money from it as well?
So I think the answer is yes and no. So there are cases where the rights inconsistencies are just a function of data matching and data retrieval and data silos within the company. It's on somebody's hard drive. There's institutional knowledge. It's sitting with, Bob or Janet over on the publishing side. There are just, let's say, stovepipes and silos and human blockages. And you have a resource who has, a request list, 103 requests deep, and they have to go into documents and retrieve it and figure it out or render a legal opinion on something. So those are things where AI can help connect the dots. There's going to be other rights clearance issues that AI will not be able to help. There are going to be things where you have a counterparty, you have to go to the estate of, this particular artist needs to sign off on something. Now you can't have AI fix that, right? There's still the element of having to negotiate with a counterparty. So Some of the issues, though, can be solved. And it's around the unstructured data, those 34 million PDFs that are sitting within UMG
Yeah.
that have to be sorted through. Those issues can be solved and made much more efficient with AI.
Mhm.
And the financial impact is real. I know we talked about sync licensing, but
Yeah.
there's just claiming with consumer streaming on the DSPs. And we have a situation where worldwide across the DSPs, there's over $2 billion of unclaimed royalties sitting in black boxes. Those royalty pools
Sure.
get distributed in other ways, but there's a lot of artist monetization that's not being claimed because of some of the data chaos. The invoices come, there's
Oh, for
emails,
sure.
they can't match it. And there's a lot of little pieces that add up to big scale, but to chase any individual piece is resource intensive. All these things are the things where the AI systems can go in and solve the issue.
But these would be, I mean, I'll go back to my experience even at Universal or at places like BMG. I mean, just organizational complexity to your point, and some of it is smart, some of it isn't so smart. It's the person in the room that's been there that, doesn't want to share information. But these would, these would be custom solutions, I would imagine, division by division, as opposed to something uniform, because there's so much complexity in these conglomerates, the bigger ones. Yeah.
I think yes and no. There's typically what we've seen with successful implementations is a respectful understanding of the workflows and how the workflows actually work and what people
Mhm.
need to do in order to solve it, and rather than coming in with a kind of
Disruptive. Yeah.
fits all. I think to your point. So, but once you do understand the workflows and you do an activity mapping, that's an activity that we'll sometimes do when we're working with companies on this, and you have a respectful understanding of how the workflow works and why it works that way, you can then sometimes take 20 different chaotic processes that are slightly idiosyncratic and different and say, really, these don't need to be 20 different chaotic processes. It's really 4 basic
Mhm.
archetypes of things that need to be, these 20 different processes can be rationalized down into 4. Then when you come to engineer the solution, there can be an AI agent, a sort of a system that can go in and it can do, 2 out of these 4 workflows. And on the other 2, it can do 50% of the other 2. And then you need, someone to do the rest. So once you break down the problem into those solvable increments, then you can design the software to conform to flow that the industry needs.
Fascinating. Interesting. When you think about, maybe the 2 big rights trees of master recordings versus publishers, I mean, this is what we're talking about today, both of us, all of us. Does it lend itself more to any, specific part of the industry? Do you see more issues with publishers on this than you do with master recordings, or is it kind of equally split?
It's kind of equally split.
Yeah. So much of the world has, the independents have taken a larger and larger share, right? And at least in music. And then there are these big things like a downtown music or things that like the Orchard that are hard to define as independents that occasionally act like majors. That's probably got to amplify some of these issues that you're talking about or the needs in the market.
Completely, because the independents don't have the same resources and infrastructure that the majors do, but they have scaled quite significantly. I mean, I think by our measure, in 2017, there's about 15% of the market was independents. Now it's like 25.
Yeah.
So the scale has increased pretty significantly. But those companies are lean and mean, and sometimes that means they're not covering all of the
Mm,
functions. Sometimes they're not claiming. They probably have a disproportionate share of that $2.5 billion of unclaimed royalties.
yeah,
They probably need this more than the labels do because they can't even afford to have the bureaucracy to do it the old way. So the need is there.
for sure. I mean, Francesco, you came up with some interesting ideas about talent and A&R and some of the classic music functions. And some of your ideas could be targeted to helping that function. Maybe thought you could share some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, of course. A&R is another interesting area where we find, aside from finding artists, a big issue that labels face is understanding trends and understanding where to allocate resources. So with AI, it can be used to better understand the trends that are developing, and therefore labels can allocate the right marketing, the right support behind the artists that they already have. We're not so much seeing it as a tool for artist discovery, but
Hmm.
more as a tool for resource allocation to make
Interesting.
better financial decisions.
I wonder, because like so many of the dashboards and the streaming services, there's obviously Spotify's so blinged out with the data they provide. If any of that, whatever offsets the point at all, or if you think if for the rights holders, there's a lot of things that could be developed on a custom basis, I guess, for them.
Sure. Well, we think it's in conjunction with all the information that you're fed from these streamers, from Spotify, from SoundCloud. But the
Yeah.
idea, be able to compile everything into one space and get a fully comprehensive view based off of what's happening on each individual
Yeah,
platform.
it's an interesting idea. It'd be interesting also just the human interface with the organizations
Right.
and explaining it. Yeah, also just broadly, maybe we can close out with this point, but FTI works pretty broadly, right? I know, Dan, you've got lots of different clients across the media and entertainment landscape, and I've seen you speak around all sorts of different Hollywood events. Like how consistent is what we're talking about today across, the studio system, Hollywood, streamers, the broader media ecosystem? Is it the same problem everywhere? Or is it lots of different pools of issues?
There's that old saying that, history may not repeat, but it can rhyme. I think the same could be said across these sectors. They're not identical issues, but they kind of rhyme with each other. There are a lot of analogies. And, the A&R question that you asked was a really interesting one, as well as Francesco's response, because almost tying it back to the original provocative premise of, well, why can't music companies have profit margins like software companies?
Hmm.
Well, one area which has shifted a little bit, kind of in the favor of being more like a software company, is this A&R function. In the old days, you had to have feet on the street. I mean, you had to have,
Sure.
you had to get your A&R people out to the troubadour. You
Yeah.
had to hear those emerging bands. And by the way, you still have to do that, but there's also the tremendous scalable world of TikTok and YouTube and who's trending. That's a huge top of funnel device that you can use. And Warner put in this whole system to use almost like a data arbitrage system to figure out who was trending on TikTok in order to tip off their A&R department on getting ahead of the next generation of talent. There's a company called Chartmetric, which does
Sure.
this. Right. So finding the next generation of talent or the new emerging talent is, to bring it back to your question, Seth, this is a critical function of any kind of entertainment company that's talent based, right? You always have to be feeding the funnel of like, what's your talent pipeline and who's coming in. This is true if you're an agency. This is true if you're a filmed entertainment studio. And this is true if you're a music company. So, but the method to do it now can be deployed at scale and can use these software tools to be very effective. And by the way, if you're not the company doing it, your competitor is. And they're going to get the advantage and they're going to get the trending talent before you do. And by the time you go to see them at the event, they've already got a term sheet out to them. So, but that analogy, right, of like, how do you get to the emerging talent earlier within this digital environment is one that's parallel across a lot of industries.
It's great, and I think it's certainly an improvement over having to know someone to tell you to go down and check the band out at the club. Although I bet there's still a little bit of that exists, right?
A little bit of that.
Yeah.
You got to do that too. That's the
Yeah.
fun part.
Yeah.
That's the fun part.
But it sounds like you're both positive on this. I mean, there's the classic question that overhangs this is about threat or opportunity. And I'm definitely hearing more on the opportunistic side on all these counts for you, as opposed to something that is going to seriously threaten the business's growth going forward.
If you're the one doing it on the front foot, it's an opportunity. If you're the one not doing it, waiting, hoping it'll go away, it's a threat.
Excellent. I think that's a great place to close, actually. It's a great comment. So thank you both for joining us. Where can people find you? Where is it, from the FTI site or LinkedIn, or give us a little sense of where people can sync up with your group, Dan?
I think LinkedIn is always great. It's so easy. Francesco Ferran, Dan Punt. You can always find us. And absolutely feel free to reach out.
All right. Well, we really appreciate both your coming on the show. And thank you so much. It's been a great episode of Breaking Down the Biz. I want to say thanks to Dan Punt and Francesco Ferran from FTI Consulting. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.